Tonight's gathering of the candidates, this special edition of Rock Center, comes after what has already been a long campaign. It started in Iowa. It continued in New Hampshire.
We made history.
But after a bruising battle in South Carolina, the fights now come here to Florida, the first big state to have a big say in the GOP contest. The issues? A stubborn 10% unemployment rate. For seniors, real concerns about the future, Medicare, Social Security, high foreclosure rates, education, immigration, and 90 miles off the Florida coast, Cuba. That and more on the agenda tonight. The debate starts now.
This is the NBC News Republican Candidates Debate in partnership with the Tampa Bay Times and National Journal. From the University of South Florida in Tampa Bay, here now, Brian Williams.
And good evening to you. Welcome to the University of South Florida. The audience is in place tonight. The candidates are here. Lord knows everyone knows each other by now. And so we get underway tonight as, again, this Republican primary battle finds itself at a critical stage. And the voters here in Florida and across the country are dialed in and paying attention. We want to get right to it, so a quick explanation of our rules. Again, familiar by now. 60 seconds for answers, 30 seconds for rebuttals or follow-ups at the moderator's discretion. We've asked our invited guests here this evening to withhold their applause, any verbal reactions to what they hear on stage, so as to ensure this is about the four candidates here tonight and what they have to say. As for topics, it's a wide-open evening, so let's begin. First of all, since we last gathered, 3 of you on stage have enjoyed victories, an unprecedented moment in the modern era. 3 separate candidates, 3 separate victories. Congratulations to you. In all 3 contests, the voters made it clear to pollsters and elsewhere, electability was a crucial element to them, a crucial argument this year. And so, Speaker Gingrich, on electability to begin with, your rival, your opponent on this stage, Governor Romney, was out today calling you erratic, a failed leader, and warning that your nomination for this party could perhaps result in what he called an October surprise a day. So, given the fact that he went after you today on this topic of electability, your response tonight, Mr. Speaker?
Well, in 1980, when Ronald Reagan started the year about 30 points behind Jimmy Carter, and when the Republican establishment described his economic ideas as voodoo economics, Reagan just cheerfully went out and won the debate, won the nomination, and won the general election, carrying more states than than Roosevelt carried against Herbert Hoover. I would suggest that a solid conservative who believes in economic growth through lower taxes and less regulation, who believes in an American energy program, who believes in a strong national defense, and who has the courage to stand up to the Washington establishment, may make the Washington establishment uncomfortable, but is also exactly the kind of bold, tough leader the American people want. They're not sending somebody to Washington to manage the decay. They're sending somebody to Washington to change it. And that requires somebody who's prepared to be controversial when necessary.
And about your problems, your departure from the speakership in the 90s, what's the case you make to the American people and voters in Republican primary contests about how you've changed, Mr. Speaker?
Well, first of all, the case I make is that when I was Speaker, we had 4 consecutive balanced budgets. The only time in your lifetime, Brian, that we've had 4 consecutive balanced budgets. Most people think that's good. We were down to 4.2% unemployment. 11 million new jobs were created. Most people think that's good. We reformed welfare, and 2 out of 3 people went to work or went to school. People think that's good. I left the speakership after the 1998 election because I took responsibility for the fact that our results weren't as good as they should be. I think that's what a leader should do. I took responsibility, and I didn't want to stay around as Nancy Pelosi has. I wanted to get out and do other things. I founded 4 small businesses, and I'm very comfortable that my 4 years as Speaker, working with a Democratic president, achieved the kind of conservative values that most Republicans want to have in a president.
Governor Romney, for his part, the Speaker said about you that you were dancing on eggs during this campaign, a good salesman with a weak product. And even Chris Christie, one of the most popular politicians in this country, speaking on your behalf, said this weekend your challenge is, quote, going to be how to connect with people. Same question to you about electability.
Well, I think this is going to come down to a question of leadership. I think as you choose the President of the United States, you're looking for a person who can lead this country in a very critical time, lead the free world, and the free world has to lead the entire world. I think it's about leadership, and the Speaker was given an opportunity to be the leader of our party in 1994, and at the end of 4 years, he had to resign in disgrace. Now, in the 1970s, he came to Washington. I went to work in my first job in the 1970s at the bottom level of a consulting firm. In the 1990s, he had to resign in disgrace from this job as Speaker. I had the opportunity to go off and run the Olympic Winter Games. In the 15 years after he left the speakership, the Speaker has been working as an influence peddler in Washington. And during those 15 years, I helped turn around the Olympics, helped begin a very successful turnaround in the state of Massachusetts. The Speaker, when I was fighting against cap and trade, the Speaker was sitting down with Nancy Pelosi on a sofa, encouraging it. When I was fighting to say that the Paul Ryan plan to save Medicare was bold and right, he was saying that it was right-wing social engineering. So we have very different perspectives on leadership and the kind of leadership that our conservative movement needs, not just to get elected, but to get the country right.
Mr. Speaker?
Well, look, I'm not going to spend the evening trying to chase Governor Romney's misinformation. We'll have a site at newt.org by tomorrow morning. We'll list everything. He just said at least 4 things that are false. I don't want to waste the time on them. I think the American public deserve a discussion about how to beat Barack Obama. The American public deserves a discussion about what we would do about the economy. And I just think this is the worst kind of trivial politics. I mean, he said at least 4 things were false. You know, we have an ad in which both John McCain and Mike Huckabee in 2007, 2008 explain how much they think Governor Romney can't tell the truth. I just suggest people look at them. Don't listen to me. Don't believe me. Just look at the ad with Mike Huckabee and Senator McCain, and you'll understand exactly what you just saw.
Governor Romney, to your electability, let's talk about the southern base of the GOP. Among those who describe themselves as very conservative, only 1 in 5 have gone your way. How is that going to bode well for the longer campaign?
Had a great record, as you know, in New Hampshire. The New Hampshire voters overwhelmingly supported me. Actually, among Republicans in New Hampshire, I got the biggest support that we've seen among Republicans, even including Ronald Reagan, that far back. So I'm pleased I'll be able to connect well with our Republican base. But let's go back to what the Speaker mentioned with regards to leadership. And that is that, I mean, we don't have to take my word for the facts. They're accurate. I'll point out that they're accurate. But the truth is that the members of his own team, his congressional team, after his 4 years of leadership, they moved to replace him. They also took a vote, and 88% of Republicans voted to reprimand the Speaker. And he did resign in disgrace after that. This was the first time in American history that a Speaker of the House has resigned from the House. And so that was the judgment rendered by his own people as to his leadership. Look, don't forget, at the end of the Speaker's term as Speaker, his approval rating was down to 18%. We suffered historic losses after his 4 years in office. The idea, and I'll make this other point, which is we just learned today that his contract with Freddie Mac was provided by the lobbyists at Freddie Mac. I don't think we can possibly retake the White House if the person who's leading our party is the person who was working for the chief lobbyist of Freddie Mac. Freddie Mac was paying Speaker Gingrich $1,600,000. At the same time, Freddie Mac was costing the people of Florida millions upon millions of dollars.
I realized last week, Governor, you said that you complained that too much of your time on stage lately has been spent on negativity vis-a-vis the other candidates. You pledged to spend your time going after the incumbent president, yet here we are again.
I'll tell you why, which is I learned something from that last contest in South Carolina, and that was I had incoming from all directions, was overwhelmed with a lot of the attacks, and I'm not going to sit back and get attacked day in and day out without returning fire. I would like not to have the kind of attacks that came against me. There were 2 ads run by Speaker Gingrich. Outside fact-checking groups said these ads were false, and yet they continued to run them. and one by his campaign, one by a PAC in his benefit, and I know he can't control that, but those ads were pretty heavy on me, so I'm going to point out things I think people need to know. It was Republicans who replaced him in the House, voted to reprimand him, and it was the head lobbyist of Freddie Mac with whom he had a contract at a time when Floridians were suffering as a result, in part, of Freddie Mac.
Mr. Speaker, 30 seconds before I move on.
Now, wait a second. I mean, he just went on and on and on, making a whole series of allegations. First of all, he may have been a good financier. He's a terrible historian. The fact is, the vote on the Ethics Committee was in January of 1997. I asked the Republicans to vote yes because we had to get it behind us. The Democrats had filed 84 ethics charges for a simple reason. We had taken control of the House after 40 years, and they were very bitter. And the fact is, on every single ethics charge of substance that was dismissed in the end, the only thing we did wrong is we had one lawyer written one letter, and the one letter was in error. I didn't pay a fine. I paid the cost of going through the process of determining it was wrong. I left 2 years later, and frankly, we were right to get it behind us because the tax cut that led to economic growth, the 4 balanced budgets, all came after that vote. So you have all this stuff just jumbled up. Apparently your consultants aren't very good historians. What you ought to do is stop and look at the facts. And the fact is, we won the House for the 3rd time in 1998, but the margin wasn't big enough. So I am the only speaker up to that point since the 1920s who had led the Republican Party to 3 consecutive victories. By the way, in 2006, when you chaired the Governors Association, we lost governorships, and in the 4 years that you were governor, we lost seats in the Massachusetts legislature. So I think as a party builder, the 20 years I spent building the House Republican Party stands pretty good as an example of leadership.
Senator Santorum, you have labeled this choice as being between an erratic and a moderate. You come in here tonight with one victory in Iowa. Where is your path to the top here?
Well, I think if you've learned anything about this election, that any type of prediction is going to be wrong. The idea that this was a 2-person race has been an idea that has been in fashion now for 8 months, and it's been wrong about 8 times. And so we're looking at this race trying to paint a positive vision for our country. You asked my path to victory. My path to victory is to tell the people of Florida and tell the people of this country of someone who's here that presents a very clear contrast with the President of the United States, someone that will make him the issue in this race, not the Republican candidate, someone who has a track record of being a strong conservative, someone who has a vision, a bold vision, to reach out to the voters that I reached out and was successful in getting when I ran for the Senate in Pennsylvania twice, a state we haven't won for the presidency since 1988. I won it twice, once in a year where George Bush lost the state by 5, and I won it by 6. How did I do it? I had plans out there that included everybody. Plans like I have today, talking about manufacturing, talking about things that are touchstones with the Reagan Democrats that provided that 49-state win. We talked about faith, we talked about family, we talked about jobs, we talked about limited government. And that message was one that connected in a state, well, just like Florida, that's one of those key states that we're going to win. And that sets me apart, really, from anybody else on this stage as someone who's been victorious with a strong, principled, conservative message.
And yet, Senator, you are former Senator Santorum, having lost your home state by 18 points.
Yeah, well, if I was the only guy that lost an election that year, then in Pennsylvania, that would be maybe a big statement. But our gubernatorial candidate lost by more than I did. We lost 5 congressional seats, and it was an historic loss in our state house. It was a meltdown year. We lost 23 out of 33 senators. And probably unlike a lot of other candidates, when you're running an election year that you know you're running against a headwind, a lot of folks crouch down. They get out of the way of the wind and try to sneak in. I stood tall, stood for what I believed in, talked about issues like the threat of Iran on the horizon, talked about the need to reform Social Security and Medicare, talked about the issues that, well, now we're all talking about today, as I did in a time when nobody wanted to hear that message. I also was running with a president who was sitting at about 35% favorable, and I was standing by him and trying to reform Social Security and trying to fight the war and win the war in Iraq, and I stand by that. And one of the things I figured out when I was running in that tough election year, there's one thing worse than losing an election, and that's not standing for the principles that you hold.
Congressman Paul, there is no denying you have an enthusiastic base of support. We could hear them outside tonight, yet there was that recent interview you were asked if, while campaigning, you envision yourself in the Oval Office, and you said, not really, but I think it's a possibility. So that begs the question about your path and when you will give an honest answer about perhaps your third-party plans going forward. Are you in this regardless of the outcome to your right here on this stage?
Well, unlike others, maybe they sit around and daydream about being in the White House. I just don't sit around daydreaming about it. But